Nobody talks about tutorials. Reviews don't mention them, Game of the Year discussions skip them, and when people rank their favorite game moments, the boss fights, the plot twists, the set pieces that made their jaw drop, tutorials are never on the list. And yet, the tutorial is the most important level in any game. Not the most exciting, not the most memorable, but the most important. Because everything that happens after it, every emotion, every discovery, every moment of genuine connection between a player and a game, depends entirely on what the tutorial did or didn't do in the first few minutes. Get it right and a player will follow you anywhere. Get it wrong and they're gone before the story even starts. Today, we're going to talk about why the tutorial is the most underrated piece of design in all of gaming, and why the best ones are invisible. The stakes nobody talks about. Let's establish something before we go any further. The global gaming market generated $189 billion in revenue in 2025. The global player base reached 3.6 billion people. 3.6 billion people. That is nearly half the planet playing video games. And most of them, the vast majority, are not hardcore gamers. They are not people who will push through a bad opening because they heard the third act is worth it. They are people with limited time, limited patience, and infinite alternatives fighting for their attention every single second. Which means the tutorial isn't just a design element anymore, it's a survival mechanism. So the question a tutorial has to answer in the first 5 minutes, often the first 60 seconds, is the most important question in game design. Why should I keep playing? Not how do I move, not how do I move or what button does what. Those are surface level questions. The deep question, the one the player is asking even when they don't know they're asking it, is where this game is worth giving themselves to. The tutorial is where that question gets answered, and most games answer it wrong. Today, we're going to look at why tutorials fail, why they succeed, and what the greatest tutorials in gaming history actually understood that most designers still don't. Chapter 1: Why most tutorials are a disaster. Let's start with a failure case, because understanding what goes wrong is the only way to understand what going right actually looks like. The standard tutorial, the one you've suffered through in hundreds of games, follows a predictable logic. Stop the player, show them a box, tell them to press a button, wait for them to press it, then show them another box, and repeat. This approach treats the player like a system to be programmed rather than a person to be engaged. It assumes that the player's primary concern is information. It isn't. Their primary concern is feeling something. The psychology here is clear. When a player sits down with a new game, they are not in learning mode, they are in curiosity mode. They want to discover. They want the first spark of genuine connection with the world they are about to spend hours inside. But a pop up box that says press X to jump doesn't create the spark, it kills it. Most video game enthusiasts dislike having their hands held. Tutorial sections aren't exactly popular, but the best tutorials teach game basics and scale without feeling intrusive. And that tension, needing to teach without feeling like you're teaching, is the central design challenge of the tutorial, and it's one most studios still haven't solved. Furthermore, the worst tutorials make three consistent mistakes. They front-load information the player doesn't need yet, they interrupt momentum to explain things the player would have figured out naturally, and they treat the tutorial as separate from the game rather than as the opening chapter of an experience. All these three mistakes come from the same root misunderstanding that the tutorial's job is to explain the game. It isn't. The tutorial's job is to make the player fall in love with the game. Those are completely different objectives, and confusing them is why so many tutorials feel like homework. Chapter 2: What a tutorial is actually teaching. Here's the reframe that changes everything. A tutorial is not a manual, it's a promise. When you play the first minutes of a great game, when the tutorial is working exactly as it should, what you're actually receiving is a promise about what this relationship is going to be. The game is telling you, here is the kind of experience I will give you. Here is how I will challenge you. Here is what it will feel like when you get good at this. The best tutorials in gaming history understood this perfectly. Just take a look at Portal. It is the exemplar of tutorial design for its near-perfect integration of mechanic, level design, and discovery. Portal's first test chambers introduced the portal gun with zero text, zero pop-ups, and zero instructions. The room is designed in such a way that the solution is obvious but feels like a discovery. You figure out how portals work not because someone told you, but because the environment showed you. and you connected the dots yourself. And that moment of connection is the most important feeling a game can create in its opening. Compare that to a tutorial that tells you how portals work with a text box. You still understand it, but you didn't discover it. And discovery is the motion that creates investment. Furthermore, Breath of the Wild is loaded for having the best tutorial in gaming. The Great Plateau teaches players everything they need to know about the game without telling players what to do. It relies on exploration and curiosity. Players discover game mechanics for themselves. Both Portal and Breath of the Wild understood the same thing. The tutorial's deepest job is not to teach mechanics, it's to teach the player how to think inside this specific game world. And that's a completely different, vastly more ambitious design objective. Chapter 3: The Tutorial as World Building. Here's what separates good tutorials from genuinely great ones. Good tutorials teach you how to play. Great tutorials make you feel like you're already living inside the world before you even understand the rules. GTA 5's tutorial is a perfect example of how a story section can be used to teach the player how to play the game. During the game's prologue, set during the failed heist, the player is taught the basics of combat, driving, and the character switching mechanic. The heist doesn't feel like a tutorial, it feels like a movie opening. You're running from the police, switching between characters, driving through snow, and your heart is already racing. And then the title card hits, and you realize you just spent 10 minutes learning every core mechanics of the game without noticing you are being taught. That is the tutorial achieving something almost impossibly difficult. It made learning invisible by making experience irresistible. Furthermore, Skyrim's tutorial starts with the Dragonborn in shackles, about to get their head chopped off, and uses the escape to teach the basics of movement, jumping, sprinting, combat, sneaking, and lockpicking, all while Elduin shows up and starts destroying everything. You are learning to move while fleeing a dragon. The learning and the word are inseparable. This is the highest form of tutorial design, when the mechanics cannot be extracted from the word because they grew out of it organically. Dark Souls does something even more radical. Dark Souls lures the player into a false sense of security with easy enemies, which isn't unusual for tutorials, but the moment they light the first bonfire, players face the Asylum Demon. Dark Souls leads the player to believe that the game might not be as difficult as they've heard before slamming them with reality. The Asylum Demon isn't just a boss, it's a statement. The tutorial isn't teaching you how to fight, it's teaching you what kind of game this is. It's telling you you will face things you cannot beat yet. That is not failure, that is the journey. Come back when you're ready. And that is a tutorial delivering a word philosophy in a single encounter. Chapter 4: The Science of First Impressions. There's actual science behind why tutorials matter as much as they do. Psychologists call it the primary effect. The information we receive first has disproportionate influence on everything that follows. First impressions don't just matter, they reshape how we interpret every subsequent experience. In gaming, this is brutal in its implications. If a tutorial makes you feel confused, even briefly, even before you consciously register the confusion, that feeling colors the entire early game. You approach the second level slightly more guarded, slightly less open. The magic is already fractured at the edges. But if a tutorial makes you feel capable, if it engineers a moment where you do something that feels impressive, even though the game designed it to be easy, you carry that feeling of capability forward. You approach challenges with confidence rather than anxiety. Furthermore, 80% of game designers report critical insights from player behavior in early game sections, while 67% of developers actively use analytics to enhance early game experience. The data backs the psychology. Studios that study early player behavior obsessively are the ones producing the best tutorial experiences, because they know what most tutorials ignore, that the emotional state a player is in when they finish a tutorial is the emotional state they bring to everything that follows. A frustrated player and an excited player can have the identical mechanical knowledge after a tutorial, but they are not the same player entering the main game, not even close, because the tutorial doesn't just teach, it sets the emotional temperature of the entire experience. Chapter 5: The Invisible Tutorial. The holy grail of tutorial design is what designers call the invisible tutorial. A level or sequence so perfectly constructed that the player learns everything they need to know without ever feeling like they're in tutorial at all. The most famous example in gaming history is also the oldest: Super Mario Bros. Super Mario Bros. Teaches players the basics through level layout that communicates constraints and opportunities without text. The first level is a carefully designed course that introduces running, jumping, enemies, power-ups, and secret exits through layout alone. Nintendo in 1985 had no tutorial screen. No pop-up, no instruction behind the layout of the level itself. The first screen of the world is a masterclass in invisible teaching. There is open space to the right, so you move right. There's a question block at exactly the height where you naturally jump, so you hit it. A mushroom emerges and moves towards you, so you either dodge or take it and discover power-ups. The first Goomba approaches from the right, so you jump on it or lose a life and learn consequences. Every single thing you need to know about Super Mario Bros. Is communicated in the first 60 seconds of the game through environmental design alone. No words, no boxes, no instructions. Just a word that teaches you to live in it by living in it. This is the standard, and it was set in 1985. But 40 years later, most games are still catching up. The invisible tutorial works because it respects the player's intelligence. It trusts that given the right environment, one with clear cause and effect, meaningful feedback, and appropriately scaled challenge, players will teach themselves. And players taught themselves become players who own their knowledge, who feel capable, who are invested, versus the players who were told, who feel instructed, who are passive, and who are one confusing moment away from disengaging. Conclusion. So, what does the best tutorial design actually understand? It understands that the player is not a student, they are a person who wants to feel something. It understands that information is the least important thing a tutorial delivers. The most important thing is emotional orientation. Am I the kind of person who can thrive in this world? It understands that the moment a player feels taught at rather than invited in, the moment they feel like a subject in a lesson rather than a participant in an experience, something is lost. And it understands that invisibility is the highest achievement. When a player finishes a tutorial and doesn't realize they just completed a tutorial, when they think they were just playing the game, but the designer has done something extraordinary, they have made learning indistinguishable from living. The best tutorials don't draw attention to themselves, they feel like organic extensions of the gaming experience. In 2026, with 3.6 billion players, with attention more fractured than it has ever been, with more games releasing every week than any human could ever play, the tutorial is not just a formality anymore. It is the moment a game makes its case for existing in a player's life. Most games treat it like a checkbox, but the great ones treat it like a first conversation with someone they hope to know for a very long time. And that difference between a checkbox and a conversation is the entire distance between games people play and games people remember forever. I'm Silver, this is Silver's Edge, and if you think about game design the way I do, not just what games do, but why and how they do it, then subscribe. Until next time, stay silver.